I know for my parents and for many other Burghers, when Bandaranaike turned to us and said, "You don't belong here, you can go." But Mum and Dad sat in their 70s and said, "My body to be burned and the ashes to go home, to go back to Sri Lanka." Between Mount Lavinia and Muratua Beach, because they fell in love on the beach. There was a yearning in their hearts for this country. He wrote a poem called Yearnings.
You are traveling with your Australian passport.
No, I'm not. And I'm very proud of that. I thought, I have to make sure that my children see this passport and I become a Sri Lankan formally. So we got the passport and at Anuradhapura, when we went through and they said €30 or $30, I said, "No, I am a Sri Lankan." And so my daughter and my son, and when they were in school and they were bullied, they argued, "We're Sri Lankan. We're proud to wear these shirts for the cricketers, and we're proud to talk about the other country that we belong to as well."
Greetings to everyone. Today we are meeting Larry Marshall.
Nice to be here.
And before I come to discussion, I want to share with you, I have written about him several times. So today you are seeing him, meeting him through our channel, Partnership. So thank you, Larry, for agreeing and coming for this program. Now you are in Sri Lanka. After how many years you are back to Sri Lanka?
But just before I answer that, can I say thank you very much for having me on and for allowing us to have this conversation. Your visit to Australia, which has happened recently, has been a big one. And there are many people who have heard your voice and will, I think, take deeply the lessons you've helped us to understand from the Dhamma. So first, thank you for that.
You know, I have discussed many times about Larry's story and the Burgher people who happened to leave the country in 1960s onwards, I think. So perhaps we do not know the story, how they felt and their story. So once I met you and then gradually I started learning about it. So that is why I strongly felt this story should be shared with every one of you. And that is why I started writing about your story and this program as well. So Larry, the story of your story will not be only your story. It is something that, story of many people. So we are very happy to, hear your voice. Can you tell us your experience in Sri Lanka and when you left the country, and that everyone will be very happy to listen to that story.
Thank you. No, I'd like to do that. And as you say, it's relevant for many people who left at the time. And I think when Bandaranaike in 1958, I think it was, made the Sinhala-only policy.
I think 1956.
56, was it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As a historian, you know the dates better than me, but I agree. At that time, I think I was far too young. I was only a little boy. But I know for my parents and for many other Burghers, when Bandaranaike turned to us and said, "You don't belong here, you can go." And it was something that was quite serious for people. Generationally, they had lived in this country, grandparents, great-grandparents. Their love of the country was very strong. And yet they were being told, because they didn't speak English, they spoke English mainly and spoke Sinhala and Tamil, like my father did both, or Sinhala not well enough and didn't look Sri Lankan enough with their whiter skin that they could leave the country. And
was it something they directly conveyed to you, or how you felt?
I think it wasn't conveyed to me as a child. It's something, though, that my father and mother, particularly my father, spoke with me about later when he was getting older and I was then a young man who was a teacher and working in history and politics. He said to me, "You know what happened, you know why we left." And he was explaining that to me. So I think there was a sense that we were not wanted here anymore, that we didn't fit in, and that Burghers were people who should return. Now, where do you return from when you're born in a place? Where do you return from when your parents and grandparents are born there? This has been thrown at many migrant groups in many different situations. Go back where you came from. It was even a television show in Melbourne that people use that phrase to people who come from outside. But we were here. This was our home. So it was a painful time, I think, and a lot of migration happened. Burghers went to England, they came to Australia, and they went to the US and other countries. So I was 13 years old when Mum and Dad told me that we'll be going on a ship to Australia, and I think it never quite struck me that I would never return here for years and decades, that this would no longer be my home in Sri Lanka, this place. But Mum and Dad had made the decision because I think they felt that we would not be able to function well in university only with English, that we couldn't do it in Sinhala at that time, because my sisters are older than me and they didn't have strong Sinhala. They had Sinhala, but they didn't have strong Sinhala. So there was a sense that they wouldn't be able to manage and grow as people into the workforce and as Sri Lankans without being restricted or excluded. So, going overseas. So Mum and Dad took us first to see the country. They took us to climb Adams Peak. They took us to Kandy, where Dad was born, in Ampitia. They took us to Trincomalee, where my uncle died. He was in the Navy and he had died there, and my mother wanted to say goodbye. They took us to World's End. We went to Anuradhapura. So we said goodbye to Sri Lanka for the moment, and we toured, and all of us went to the Peradeniya Gardens elsewhere, and we went to Australia. Now, the interesting thing about that is that many people in Sri Lanka would think, well, there you are. You're lighter skinned, you speak English very well, you just fit in. But Australia in 1967 had a policy that said, white Australia. This was made as the first piece of legislation when Australia became a country in 1901, the white Australia policy. They wanted to be a white country. And after the Second World War, when migrants from places like Sri Lanka came in, we were treated very badly. Within days, I was bullied, I was called a black so-and-so.
So when you reach Australia, you were not welcomed as a white person, but
as a brown person who didn't fit in, who spoke with a strange accent, who didn't understand the religions of, and I mean religions in inverted commas, of football in Australia. You know, the sport-mad Australians expect you to speak like them, to love the same things. And as a youngster, I and my sisters were very badly bullied in school. And I felt really when I listened in class that my English was better after having studied here in school than the English I was hearing the Australians speak, the Anglo-Australians. Now that may be a bit tough, but I was proud of what I'd learned in Sri Lanka in St. Thomas's, where I went to school. So it was a difficult time to actually move there and as a teenager to fit in when you were, again, excluded.
So within 24 hours time, you are excluded twice.
Yes.
Here you felt you are no more welcomed here. So
Too white.
Too white, and when you go there, you are not.
You're too brown and too black,
That's right.
depending on the view,
Okay.
So it did teach me, as a historian you would understand, and as I grew older and taught myself, it taught me about what a painful and negative experience it is to impose racism on a group of people just because of the color of their skin, the language they speak, their religion. If we exclude a whole community like that, they will rise up. They have to fight back. And that is, I think, what I was watching happening in my homeland while I was growing up in Australia.
Up till 13, what you can remember, where your childhood, where you were, and then the schooling and all, whatever, if you can.
A little bit of that.
Yeah.
Well, we were in Kiribati in Kelaniya. That was our home. It was a housing scheme of many different classes and cultures, and it was meant to be a place where people came together. So one of Dad's best friends was Kirti Abesekara, another was Owen De Silva, who ran a photography studio. There were others who were Muslim friends, and there was a club built where all people would play, all people would be together. So there was a sense that this was a new community happening. If you go to Kiribati now, it's a very different place. It's a very busy place. But for me as a child, it was wonderful. It was a beautiful place to grow up. And from there, I was taken by bus, on a double-decker bus in those days, to St. Thomas's. And then after school, either my father would pick me up after work and take me home, or I'd catch a bus and they'd say, "Podimate, we are here." And I'm fast asleep in the front of the bus. But it was glorious times. There were times of cricket and good food and friends who spoke Singlish, where I spoke a bit of Sinhalese and they spoke a bit of English, and we communicated. But it was a wonderful growing up time for me.
And what about your friends in school? You had friends from all the communities, or can you remember your school days?
It's a good question, yeah. I think we take some of the divisions that exist around us for granted, and they're wordist divisions. There were divisions on colour, there were divisions on ethnicity in my school, and the school, St. Thomas's, was also including people from other cultures who were visiting, like an ambassador's son or a son of a banker, someone who's from the United Nations, for example, would come to this school as a private school, I guess. And there were layers of discrimination within our groups where individuals or groups were put aside. Not too obviously, but on the playground, there was name calling, and I had difficulty understanding it, I think, in my early years, 9, 10, as to why it happened. But as I got a little older, I could see that these were distinctions on race and on colour. And I wonder where we learnt that, maybe from our colonizers.
You're talking about Kandy and Talaguli, what is it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Mum and Dad often drove to Kandy. I think I told you the story. Thanks for reminding me. Because Dad's mother and father built their house in Kandy. We were in Colombo, Mount Lavinia, and then in Kiribati. So quite often, once a month or so, we'd go up the Kandy Road. And we had to stop at Jinnadas's Talaguli. We had to stop for pineapples. We had to stop at places that the kaju girls were selling the kaju. So it became quite a lovely journey each time we went. It was long because there was a lot of traffic, still bullock carts, still double-decker buses at times, and smaller, thinner roads. But my father was lucky, was working and had a car, so we were able to go.
And I met your sister, one sister.
That's right.
And yes, I think although, you are the youngest in the family?
I am the fourth. I have 3 elder and 1 younger sister, and I'm the one spoilt man in the family. So,
I like to, I'm sure that the viewers will be happy to hear about, once you left the country and, from 13 onwards, you grow in Melbourne, in Australia.
Yes.
And the memory about the Sri Lanka and how it, not only the memory, and when you work in the country, how you reflect on your childhood, and not only you, how your father and mother look at it. I'm sure it will be helpful for us to.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because my 2 older sisters were, I think, 18 and 17 or late 16. So 4 of us went to school, the younger ones. My elder sister, who had finished school, went to a bank and got a job as a teller. And it was very useful money for the family because Sri Lankan dollars were still not worth an enormous amount in Australia. My father managed to find a clerical job because all of his skills and experience here were ignored. So he had to start as a clerk in a place. You start from the bottom. My mother, who had brought us all up at home, had to find a job in a factory for, I think, $25 a week at that time. So it was a shock to her as well to go and work in a factory. My eldest sister was an interesting story because she had fallen in love with a young man just before we left. And he was sending her beautiful tapes of "My heart is breaking and I'm lonely and I miss you" and all of these lovely things.
He was from Sri Lanka?
From Sri Lanka,
Okay.
on little reel-to-reel tapes. His name was Ramsay Gunasekara, and he used to ride a Norton bike when he came to visit my sister, who was beginning to be in her late teens. So after a year in Sri Lanka, a second year in Australia, after we had settled for a couple of years, she said to my father, "I'm in love with this man and I want to marry him. And he's asked me to marry him." And Dad said, "How are you going to do this?" She said, "I'm going to fly back, bring him over, and we'll get married, and then he'll be allowed to stay as my partner." And Mum and Dad were shocked at this. "How can you go? I have to come with you, and I can't. I've got to look after the family." My father was quite worried about this. And she said, "I will be fine. I will go. Ramsay is organizing at the other end. He will come with me. Within 6 months, we have to be married." And Mum and Dad are saying, "Where are we going to find the money to do a wedding?" Not Sri Lankan style, but still a wedding. But all that happened. So she came alone against my father's wishes in terms of travel. But he knew that they loved each other. So he came back and he married my sister, and Mum and Dad had to, I think, borrow the money. But it was a beautiful wedding. And we became Sri Lankan Australians, if you like, settling.
So it is continuing. It is not totally, disconnecting, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, the connection was there. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great story. Mm-hmm. And now about your parents and how they, because you spent here 13 years and your sisters little more than that. And for your parents,
43 years. Both of them were born in 1923.
Right.
So it was 43 years of birthdays into their 44th year when they left. So they had, everything was here. Everything. The networks, histories, all the relations, the jobs that Dad and Mum had in different places. Dad worked in Galoya, the Galoya Development Board in the late 50s. He'd worked in Colombo in a firm. He'd worked in industrial relations in the tea estates, speaking Tamil and Sinhala, bringing people together for mediation. So all of that history was, of course, ignored when you start in a new country where there is a white Australia policy. You are just the bottom of the lowest. So what he did was he got a job as a clerk, but he also went to university and got his degree in 3 years in accounting. So he was up at 4 a.m. studying, then he'd go to work, come home and do some more work, and he passed his degree, determined to give all of us a better life.
Now, that's, I think, very good story when he left the country when he was 43.
Yep.
And then entered into the university and completed his degree
in Australia. And he was an inspiration to all of us because he knew that education was a key. As migrants in Australia, if we wanted to go forward, we had to get our education right or we would be excluded from jobs.
And how they, while they were busy helping all of looking after children, and I know they left because of they felt like, but how they their whole story, history is it is connected with this island and how they manage with that.
Yeah, I think My father was very reflective. My mother loved cooking rice and curry for us, which we had quite often in the week. The songs of Jim Reeves, which she had, I think, 8 albums when she was here. I think they came with us to Australia. And the music of Harry Belafonte and those 50s songs that we danced to in Kiribati, we still dance to in Melbourne. So that culture was with us. And most of the people who visited were Sri Lankans of various nationalities in Sri Lanka, in Australia. What I mean is there were Muslim friends, there were Buddhist friends, there were Christian friends, there were, Tamil friends. So the culture in Australia was an inclusive one in our home, but I don't think that was the case across the board. I think there was a burger community that I think still practiced being burgers, and that meant being slightly superior to the other members of the Sri Lankan community. I think also as the war raged in the 80s, there was a Sinhalese celebration of New Year in April. There was a Tamil celebration of New Year, and they didn't come together to do that. So there was the divisions that were building here were echoed in Melbourne, and that was very sad to see. And I think what my father reflected with me as he got older was the things that we rejected, we meaning burgers, people wearing sarong, people eating rice and curry every day. Not that they were rejected totally, but it was sort of looking down at that, being a little more European. Now, I'm not saying every burger does this, but it was certainly something that was part of the way burgers saw themselves. And that shifted when they went to Australia, because suddenly they were at the bottom of the pile, not the top, like I was saying to you in school. So they began to love Sri Lankan culture, baila music, eating lamprey and eating rice and curry. The culture that they had slightly rejected, they embraced as their own when they were far away from it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Dad wrote a poem about this, the people in between the burgers, and he was quite annoyed at the way the people in Melbourne had forgotten their own sins, if you like, had forgotten the way they treated their neighbours and others, and now acted like everybody loved the same things. So he had a critical voice about it. Yeah.
And you told about your mother and her last will and...
Yes, there was a story. Well, Mum would make Christmas cake, and she would make love cake. She would make brutha, which is another thing that the burgers make on the 25th. So there was a lot of the culture that she did through her cooking. Like most mothers in Sri Lanka, we learn at their feet, we learn in the kitchen about what matters to us in terms of food and culture. But Mum and Dad sat in their 70s and said, what happens when we die? What happens to us? So they said, I don't think I want to be buried. I want my body to be burned and the ashes to go home, to go back to Sri Lanka. So whoever was to go first promised that the other would take the ashes and come to Sri Lanka. So my mother was the first to pass in 2007, and my father, she died in January, and her birthday was in August, and he was determined that on her birthday, her ashes would be here, alongside between Mount Lavinia and Muratua Beach, because they fell in love on the beach, hiding under those parasols, walking in the moonlight. They fell in love as young people in their late teens and 20s when he'd come back from being in the Second World War. and they got married in 1947. So he came with my eldest sister and Ramsay, her husband, who brought him here, and he'd written a love poem to her, put it in a bottle and put the cork on it, and with her ashes he put the love poem into the ocean. He's a romantic, like she was. So it was a good story. It was a lovely story, and he brought her home.
And same about your father. He also wanted the same thing to happen.
That's right. They both said they wanted their ashes back here. So Dad lived to a good old age, 94. He published his biography, he published poetry while he was there, and he was still interested in Sri Lankan politics and Sri Lankan society very much. So when he passed, we all decided we wanted to bring him home, not just one of us or two of us, but all of us. So that my 4 sisters, all married with children and some grandchildren, and myself and Cynthia, we got organized. Cynthia and I came 3 months early to do the organizing, to get the organization of the hotel and transport, and we were doing it around Christmas. So we had to book places for Christmas, and we had to make sure the beach was going to be all right for us to do a special ceremony. So we did all of that. And 26 members of the family came to bring Dad home. And each of my sisters had some of the ashes with their families, and we brought them back together, Mum and Dad, back in Sri Lanka, back in Colombo, back at the beach where they fell in love.
I'm sure it is a remarkable, I think not only the, next generation, grandchildren all came and...
Yeah, for my children, who were then, just 5 years ago, in their 20s, they had already been here with my wife and I before when they were young. Just an anecdote, we were in Anuradhapura and the people were telling us about the great stupas. And they said, did you ever meet the anthropologist Uncle Eddie? And I said, yes, in fact, he told my children about the great stupa. And he said, Uncle Eddie is one of the greatest anthropologists. And when we came back, Uncle Eddie's stories were on their lips. They had learned so well from him about Anuradhapura, its history. He asked them, how many bricks do you think it took to build that? 93 million, or more than one. He had them laughing, he had them joking, but they understood the importance of what they were seeing, our history as a nation. So they know the place, and when they were there with my father and my other siblings and their children, they were back in love with Sri Lanka. So they came, we climbed Adams Peak, they've come since as well, and they want to come back again.
And here, I think there is an important point, and how someone feel where you belong.
Yes.
I think that is something. It is not the money, it is not the luxury, it is something that more than that.
Yes,
right?
That's right. It's the heart thing, isn't it? Something about where you belong. It doesn't mean that you can't have a love for two places. If you live in this global world, it's a village where we move around. But something about this little island of ours, if you are born here and your roots are here, then you do want your children too to understand how much it means to you and how much it meant to my mother and father, how much it means to my sisters. So all of us have been back because we want those roots to grow and we want them to realize they have two homes, Australia and Sri Lanka. So it is very, very important what happened with Mum and Dad.
Well, now I like to, what I learned when I visited your place and your sister, and
Denise,
you have been studying, you have been doing research about the history of your, the ancestral history. And perhaps it will be good to listen to the story of your, grandparents and what you have so far discovered.
Yes, it's probably a bit too long to go into it in any detail.
Yeah, very
but
briefly.
It's fascinating. It really is fascinating because we know that in the north of Australia, where they grow cane for sugar, sugar cane, there's hard work to be done. And Australians back in the late 1800s, the 19th century, were, we might say, stealing workers from the Pacific. It was called blackbirding. They would bring people over, not as slaves, but certainly at very low income, take their passports and have them working very hard. Strangely, there was a ship from Sri Lanka with 500 Sri Lankans on board who also came to Australia. And strangely, my grandmother on my father's side was born in Queensland from some of the people who were on that ship. One of the young boys who grew up and married a woman from Denmark. And so my grandmother was born in Australia. And it was that allowed us to open the door through the White Australia policy to actually get back into Australia. Otherwise, we would have been excluded. It was that little drop of European blood because the gentleman had married, my great-grandfather had married a woman from Denmark. So, we were allowed because we had slightly lighter skin to come.
So the person who married that Denmark lady was
a Sinhalese man.
Sinhalese man.
Who was brought as a child by his mother and father to try and find work and bring up a family in Australia. So they were enticed by being told good work there. And it was in the late 1890s when there was a downturn in the world economy and lots of Sri Lankans had lost their jobs. The coffee blight had meant there was a loss of jobs in coffee. So there was a real sense of needing to look for work. And somebody recruited 500 people onto a ship at that time to go to Sri Lanka. And in some ways, we were the beneficiary of that because my grandmother was born there.
In Queensland, Australia.
In Queensland.
And do you remember the name of the person who has gone from Sri Lanka?
No, I have a picture of him in my mind because we put together this book. His name is Weniton.
Wanatunga.
But it was Wanatunga.
Yes.
And they anglicized the name to fit in. And it became Wenitong, Weniton, and different versions until it settled as Weniton.
So the Wanatunga, right?
Yes.
Wanatunga is Sri Lankan.
I think it's Wanigatunga.
Wanigatunga from Sri Lanka.
Yeah,
he has gone to Queensland to work in cane fields.
With his wife and 3 children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then one of the children grows up
and
marries a
Denmark
woman.
lady.
Yes.
Okay. So that lady was your great-grandmother or grandmother?
Great-grandmother.
Great-grandmother. Right. Okay. And after that, they have come back to Sri Lanka.
That's right. They were furious at the White Australia policy. This man who grew up in the 1890s said, what is happening to this country? They don't want us here. They will treat you badly, to his children. So he returned. Isn't that interesting? He returned from a racist country, being Australia, to find his home again in Sri Lanka.
Right.
Now that's a story worth telling, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And twice they shift. Once they shift from Australia to Sri Lanka because there is a racism or kind of you are not welcome here.
Yeah.
And after 2 generations time, you are leaving back to Australia
because
thinking that here you are not.
That's right. That's a very good story. I think it's a very complicated story, our histories. Yeah. Yeah, so the other part of the story is that my father's side, his father is from Ampitia, and his father was my father's grandfather. So my great-grandfather was a man from England who had come to work on the tea estates. He was a manager. And many of the men, I would say many, maybe I'm generalizing too much, but many of the men from those countries had love affairs or affairs without love. I don't know, no judgment, but yeah. So he had a woman from the village as his partner. They had 2 children, And he had a nice big bungalow with a big veranda, and there was a storm, as we've had in Colombo today, with thunder and lightning. They watched the storm, it sort of finished, and he went out on the patio where there was a piano, and he was a pianist. He began to play. And the last lightning bolt of that storm hit him, and he died. And he was in his 30s. So it was a loss, but these two young boys, his kids, his children, were lighter skinned with blue eyes, and nobody asked, so what about the mother? It was written in the papers that they became orphans. And in our family story, they became orphans. And then as we grew older, we said, but there must have been a mother involved. Who was the mother of this person? And we have since found out her name was Siriawati. She was from the local village, but never accepted or given any rights as a woman who was the mother of these two boys to bring them into a life. So they were taken, supposedly, not taken if you like, but children are taken from families. They were taken into the sanctuary of the monastery up there. What's it called? Ampitiya Seminary.
Okay.
Where they were teaching priests. And they grew up there. And later on, my grandfather built his house in Ampitiya underneath the seminary. But the mother didn't figure in their lives. But my father, when he was 15, met his grandmother, met this lady, Siriawati. And by then she was going blind. And she had called him Puta, and the Puta. And she had held his face gently and said, that she loves him and spoke to him gently. But I don't know why those two boys never were given a chance as they became young men to be with their mother, except for the racism, of course, against, and the colonial teachings that somehow being white and being European was much more important than being with your mother as you grow up.
Yes, so many
stories.
Yes, and so we cannot get rid of this, the history, right? This is not something that is created, that is part of the history, right? That during that time, how the people thought of white people are superior,
But the people didn't think of it themselves, did they?
Yeah.
They were taught it by the Portuguese first, then by the Dutch, and then very much by the English. That everybody who didn't look white enough was either that far down or further down the ladder in the society. So we learned our racism. I think there were disputes between Sinhalese and Tamils and for centuries before over land and over power. But this sense that we weren't equal as human beings, I think, is a particular teaching of colonialism, which has festered in Sri Lanka. And unfortunately, under Bandaranayaka's single-only policy was made into law and then had its repercussions in, I think, feeding a whole generation of people who felt they were being excluded. And that ended up with a civil war, a civil war that took 100,000 lives. So I do have a sense that the blame should also go to our colonizers who left behind these ideas that people are superior if they speak right, if they look right, if they have the right skin. And that allows for divisions of enormous magnitude and exclusion. And racism of that size has huge pain, agony, and war.
And, I was thinking about Siriawati and her story and how she felt and, losing her two children and, and I'm sure Siriawati was very helpless woman in the village. And then the agony and the wounds, right? The agony of Siriawati's agony. And gradually when you grow up and then you have to leave the country because it is, you do not feel, or your parents didn't feel that their children will be safe, or
treated
that is
fairly.
Yeah, that's right. And when you go there also again you feel that you are not welcome equal, and you are inferior to those white people, and your parents live with that memory of Sri Lanka, and started writing the story, and even when they passed away, they wanted the ashes to,
You asked me earlier, how did Dad and Mum respond to being away from Sri Lanka? I remember my father saying, I would give anything to go back. I would give anything to sit on my porch with a bottle of arak and say, Goma the Machan, and talk to my neighbors, He ached for it, but he couldn't leave us and his grandchildren. So there was a yearning in their hearts for this country. He wrote a poem called Yearnings, to see the women picking tea on the tea estates, watching the sun set at Goldface Green. There was a lot of heartbreak for them in living away, but they did it for us. As he got older and was more sedentary, found it more difficult to move around, he used to snack at home, but he wouldn't start the day without a pulsambol sandwich. And if we didn't have pulsambol and we'd run out, he said, bring the sinisambol. And he'd put butter on the toast and then sinisambol on top, and that was his breakfast. And if he could inveigle my auntie, who used to live in the house with him as he got very old, to make rice and curry every day, that's what he wanted. So rice and curry was his regular feast. But then it really is what we do as Sri Lankans overseas, as our Burghers Sri Lankans, our family. At Christmas time, we do make some cake, love cake and Christmas cake. But when we get together, my eldest sister makes her special curry. We make our special curries. We all make rice, and we all make our curries, put them on the table, and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren eat rice and curry, and we love it. For birthdays,
it's not Australian meal, it is Sri Lankan.
It's not an Australian Western meal. This is our home food. It's what feeds our souls. So we eat rice and curry. We eat rice and curry for Christmas, for birthdays. And we have encouraged our children to be proud of their Sri Lankanness, to be proud of being Sri Lankan. And so my daughter and my son very, very proudly will argue. And when they were in school, and they were bullied, they argued, we're Sri Lankan. We're proud to wear these shirts for the cricketers, and we're proud to talk about the other country that we belong to as well. So yes, it's very much a part of our family culture to be proud to be this Sri Lankan.
And that's great, Larry, to listen the story, how you felt, how your parents felt, and the story, the whole story. I think this is very good story for our viewers. I am sure you can reflect on the continuous wounding, and that if you are not healed, you tend to wound others. That is the colonialism, and then how it it is not just they are coming, and it is not only that, there are other things happening. And Siriavati's story,
yes,
and she we don't know her story after that. She she was forgotten.
Yes,
and then you feel that here your parents feel that you are not anymore, whether it is factually correct or not, that is a different matter, but they felt that their children will not be safe here. That is why they decide to leave. And again, you feel that you are not safe there in a way, So I'm sure this suggests that we need to go for healing and share our stories.
Absolutely.
And to make a place where everyone is welcome, where everyone is accepted, everyone is given equal opportunity, and that is what is needed, right? And to make a place where everyone can live, and that is what I think So I'm sure your story and this will be very useful for us to, for every one of us to continue this dialogue. And not only that, with this story, maybe we can connect with other Burgher people who left the country and we don't have any trace. And we have to tell every one of you, we are looking for. And we strongly feel that we have to come back, we have to come together and make Sri Lanka where everyone is welcomed and included, and inclusive Sri Lanka. Sure. So I'm sure this sharing will be very important, and for the next generation people to learn. And yes. So Larry, you are traveling with your Australian passport.
No, I'm not. And I'm very proud of that, because when Dad died, I thought about all of this that we've been talking about, the meaning of this country in our lives, and I thought, I have to make sure that my children see this passport and I become a Sri Lankan formally with the government stamp. So I put in for the Sri Lankan passport and a dual citizenship. I was made an Australian when we went to Australia because I was still a child. So when they became Australian citizens, I became an Australian citizen. So I had an Australian passport. But when Dad died in 2018, I said to myself, I need to make a symbolic statement. I need to become a Sri Lankan again and show my children and my family that this is so important to me and this link matters. So we got the passport, and I had friends go and pick it up for me because we were over there and they were delivering the passport out here. But this time, for the first time, I've been able to travel with it. And I get very good treatment at the airport. And at Anuradhapura, when we went through and they said €30 or $30 US, I said, no, I am a Sri Lankan. And they said, you don't look Sri Lankan. Using your story again about not ever fitting in correctly. But I was able to speak a little bit in Sinhala, and so, Mage Rata Sri Lanka, Mage Gama Kiribad Koda. Eka Mage passport. So I have a Sri Lankan passport and I'm very proud of it.
And one last thing. When I wrote about your father's biography, many people asked from where they can buy.
Oh, I see.
And is there any way if you can make an e-copy or something?
We can make a copy actually of it, because when we published it, we published about 50 copies. And they were given around the family formally to his sisters and his brothers and then to his children. But quickly there was a lot of interest, so another 50 or 60 copies were printed. But I think we could still manage to do some copies. The technology is so much better these days for making e-copies. So let us look into that, and I'd be very happy to be able to make that accessible to people.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry. And during my stay in Australia, last 2.5 months' time, I was staying with them and I could go with them to, they are very much engaged in some, Buddhist activities happening in Melbourne, Bendigo area. And then I visited your sister.
Yes, Denise.
And then I met your
my cousin.
Auntie.
No, and my auntie in Adelaide.
Yeah, your father's sister.
Yes.
And I visited them as well.
Yes.
And yes, this sharing is very, very important.
Yeah.
And thank you, Larry. And I have to thank Cynthia, even though she is not in that, this will be very, very important discussion. And thank you.
Can I also say just one final thing, and that is that these conversations that open up stories of pain and exclusion are also a time of learning, because it's only when we suffer, like the Burghers have suffered at times, that we open our hearts to the suffering of other Sri Lankans, to what happened that created the war, to those who suffered and died in the war from all sides, to the Muslims who died in Kathankode and elsewhere. So I think it is only when we hear each other's stories that we begin to understand how similar we are as human beings, and how much we have to offer each other in healing, as you say.
This telling a story, our own story, that's very strong way of bringing us together, and we all feel that there is no my pain is bigger than yours. There is no
That's right. Yes, that's nowhere for that to go really, because it isn't. We have to listen to each other and appreciate.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marshall, and thank you. And I have to thank Cynthia again.
Yeah.
And thank you for being, and agreeing to share your story.
Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you.